All right, let's go ahead and get started. The first topic for the day is office development. We're going to obviously be going through office, industrial, and retail development today. And so obviously today is dedicated 100% to the development class. So with that, let's just sort of start out with some of the basics related to office development and kind of talk about, I guess initially, sort of the classification of office space. Specifically, this whole thing of like Class A, Class B, and Class C. While all the other product types that have kind of their own classification systems, office buildings, pretty much every time people talk about office buildings, they tend to categorize them as either being Class A, Class B, Class C. Now, a lot of times people don't maybe fully understand, is this kind of like an absolute thing, or is this something that changes over time? What are these characteristics that kind of make up in other words, the designation that a particular building gets? Is it consistent across markets? All those sorts of questions we need to kind of delve into and try to answer. So let's just sort of start off. And in your mind, hopefully you've read through the chapter. Obviously it gives you some information. If you haven't, that's okay. But just what are your impressions of what is the difference between a Class A, a Class B, and a Class C? What are some of the things that make up that difference?
The age.
Okay. The newer the building, theoretically, should have a higher rating. Okay,
Location.
What else? I'm sorry?
Location?
Yep. Better the location, better the rating.
Amenities.
Amenities, absolutely. And what might be some of those amenities?
Like a high-class lobby.
Okay, so like so maybe some of the design features, that sort of thing, quality of the elevators, okay, all that kind of stuff. All right?
With building security.
Absolutely. Because you obviously have some tenants that are going to want a really high level of security. Others, you're going to want people being able to pretty much just walk in, walk up, no big deal, no problems there. Okay, what else?
Okay.
Oh, efficiency, yeah.
Okay, building efficiency and the layout. Okay. Okay. Ryan, you had another one I thought?
Service.
What's
Service.
service in what way?
Just the services at the building.
Okay, so once again, kind of almost like amenities, but
Okay.
okay. I understand what you're saying though. Okay, all right, what else? Yeah, okay, so then we start getting into the issue of rents, okay, in terms of what are the rents being charged by one versus the other, okay? Now, to a certain extent, all of these are determinants, to a certain extent, of the rents and the rating, okay? All right, what else is going to be different between them?
Overall better finishes.
Okay, the finish out, design.
How about,
Go ahead.
do you wrap demographics into location?
You could, absolutely.
How about the presence of the, you say that name of the building and people are familiar with it and.
Okay, so the prestige.
The prestige, yeah.
Corporate branding on it.
Okay. All right. Another thing that, all of you are sort of leaving out, but yet again, it's kind of like a chicken and egg sort of thing, but the tenants.
Go.
What type of tenants are actually occupying the space? Once again, very high-end attorneys and accounting firms and, that sort of thing, or is it, more kind of mom and pop kind of, single sort of individual office, users, that sort of thing. All right, so now, in terms of kind of these individual sort of classifications, first of all, let's ask the question, so is a building that's built and initially enters the market as a Class A space, does it always stay a Class A space inherently?
No.
Not necessarily. Because over time, what happens? Okay, the deterioration and the inability in some instances to maintain it to the level that would keep it classified as a Class A. Okay, just simply because of the functional obsolescence that may be, present, that, without almost just completely regutting the building, you may have difficulties in keeping it, at that level, okay? So is a Class A building in Miami the same as a Class A building in, I don't know, even Fort Lauderdale? Probably not. Okay, chances are the buildings in Miami, those are that are really classified as Class A, are probably going to have additional features and additional characteristics that are going to be more enhanced or better than what may be in a market like Fort Lauderdale. And then obviously as you sort of stair step down into tertiary markets, those the Class A building in Miami, or for that matter, the Class A building in one of those tertiary markets might actually be more like a Class B or Class C in Miami. So that's the sort of thing that you've also got to take into consideration, is that classification scheme. It just depends on what you're comparing it to. Okay. Now, who comes up with these ratings? Well, yeah, the market, but historically there was every market kind of has their own sort of I guess set of folks that come up with these, and like in Dallas, Texas, they had a guide that would come out literally every year, and it was like a picture book for many years before obviously the internet version, but it was called Black's Guide to the office market, and it literally had all of the details for each individual office building within the Dallas market, with photos, with the details of the square footage, with the tenants that were typically in the property, a whole description of a lot of these sort of characteristics to kind of be able to sort of show you, okay, here is what they have determined as being kind of the Class A, Class B, Class C, and also what the rent levels were for each of these. And it was pretty much an independent kind of market research firm, but tenants, developers, lenders, whoever would subscribe to this service to effectively kind of use that as a basis for kind of determining. And always there would be the case of where there's going to be disagreement as to is my building really a Class A or a Class B, and kind of problems with that. But nonetheless, it's usually the sort of thing that, yeah, the market's going to sort of dictate it, but it's just a question of who tends to maybe try to put that information out there in a usable form for everyone to kind of consume. Because the big difference, and the reason why that you would really care, is because what? The rental rates would be dramatically different.
Right.
Where the Class A space, once again, depending on the market you're talking about, could be $50, $60, $70 a square foot. The Class B might be $30, $40, $50 a square foot, and then the Class C might be more like $15, $20 a square foot. And so huge difference. Well, what difference does that make from the perspective of the developer? How much money you can put into the project up front with regard to construction cost? Because as you sort of work through, and we're going to be doing a little bit more of that today, kind of the whole front door, back door approach, that to a large extent, your development budget is going to be driven by what are the rents that I'm going to be able to achieve on this property. Okay, make sense? Okay. Any thoughts, questions, observations on the classification stuff? Yep.
You saw that building, that 901 Ponce that we were looking at, that Gwen purchased through his firm, that we did like the due diligence on for San Miguel?
No, I did not.
Okay. Because I immediately thought that was Class A. And San Miguel's like, no, that's definitely Class B.
What was his argument for being Class B?
1986.
Yeah, it was an
Oh,
older
was the age.
building, but I mean, it was really not, good looking building on the outside, really nice looking lobby on the inside. It was in a really good market, Coral Gables. It just wasn't in the best location within that sub-market. And guess that was probably the main reason, is the age and that it wasn't
Right.
on the prime area of Coral Gables. It was kinda like on the
Right.
fringe of it.
And they had a good tenant, right?
They had great tenants in there, you know, American Airline building and,
And as I said, I mean, a good portion of this could be very subjective.
Yeah.
but it's
But you
difficult
could
when
also
you look
kind
to
of-
compare though, you know, cause there's a big price difference between
Oh, no, it's huge.
Class A and Class B, just when you look at the general, you know, CoStar reports or.
Right.
Or that, you know, so it's an important.
It's a huge, I mean, it's a very important
huge impact
determination
when
and
You
distinction.
need to figure out what is it.
Right. No, I would agree.
Because I had read some content that, that said it was afterward, that said it was a Class A, so it is like subjective.
Yeah, well, and then also, once again, as I said, it can evolve over time.
Yeah.
You know, so what gets introduced, you know, as a Class A building in 1986, you know, who's to say that 30 years later,
Yeah.
that it's gonna be able to maintain that classification, because there are going to be features about it, even with the best maintenance program and that sort of thing, that make it a bit of a challenge to, you know, keep it on that playing field, okay? All right. So, what about even within a city, the whole thing of the Class A versus Class B versus Class C, and comparing like the central business district sort of market to more of a suburban market versus an office sort of park market, that sort of thing? I mean, what about the classifications? Are they gonna hold there as well, or are they gonna vary dramatically? Yes, sir.
Just checking on you, make sure everything's okay.
Well, actually, the projector was acting kind of weird. I mean, apparently the screen brightness wasn't working too well.
Do you want me to take a look?
Not right now, but you know, maybe before next week.
I got you.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. So I had a question or not? Okay, yep, I'm sorry.
Speaking about.
Oh, yeah, yeah, so comparing basically the CBD versus kind of the suburban market versus kind of the office park market with these classifications, I mean, how much do they sort of hold true, or do they vary quite a bit over those, even within those markets? In other words, if you looked at downtown Fort Lauderdale, an office building in downtown Fort Lauderdale is classified as Class A, versus one that might be in more of kind of a suburban area, I mean, is it the classification gonna hold up even there?
Yeah,
Problem.
I think doesn't it fall in a different category? Wouldn't it be Class A suburban market?
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
So you would want to segment it, is what I'm effectively getting to. And so the idea, once again, because, and the whole reason we care about this, and the only reason that I'm trying to go into any level of detail on this, is how important that classification is from the point of setting the rents and understanding where your development falls within that. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move forward. All right. So we mentioned all of these, the text is sort of, obviously we mentioned location, age, the property management, amenities, layout, tenants, occupancy level, rents, technology, building materials, design, prestige, and then also one feature that we did leave off the list was the whole issue of energy efficiency. Okay? How important do you think that is? I mean, obviously you guys are really involved in the whole LEED certification aspect of properties, but I mean, how important do you think, you know, sort of opening this up to everybody initially, the whole idea of kind of energy efficiency and LEED certification and that sort of thing to a prospective tenant? Leave you guys out of it for the moment, since you guys are obviously in that. All right.
Well, I think it's huge because it affects operational costs. I'm sure if the building's more efficient, then the light bill's a different price.
Yes.
The water's a different price.
Yes.
And it affects the rent.
Okay. I would tend to agree with that. Anybody else want to add something, or something a little bit different maybe?
I think it goes back to the prestige of the building as well.
Okay, so having that certification and because obviously with LEED, you have multiple levels of certification. You kind of have just like a basic sort of LEED certified, you have LEED silver, you have LEED gold, and LEED platinum. And the idea is that with each sort of incremental level of certification, LEED platinum being the highest, that supposedly that is using the cutting edge, state-of-the-art technology to effectively make it as energy efficient but also as sustainable as possible, theoretically. Okay, now we can argue the finer points of that, but theoretically that's, you know, supposed to be the case. But the point though is that from the developer's perspective, is the extra money that you maybe have to spend up front for the LEED Platinum certification potentially going to translate into higher rents that ultimately that you're going to be able to achieve from the tenant? And that's usually where a lot of the debate begins to sort of, you know, come into all of this, right?
I think it depends on the tenants you're trying to attract too. If you feel like the tenants going into the building have some sense of a corporate responsibility.
Absolutely.
Then that's gonna make.
Well, and that's an excellent point to make, because a number of companies have, at the corporate level, have said, we will only occupy LEED certified or LEED silver or LEED gold, you know, government facilities even, that certain divisions of the federal government have said all of our buildings must meet the equivalent of a LEED gold standing. And that even gets even to another issue is the certification itself worth it? Or do we just simply build to the standard of the LEED gold, you know, LEED platinum, whatever it might be, and don't actually seek the certification just from the standpoint of the additional cost incurred to go through the certification process? So that's yet another issue that we would potentially want to address. But one of the more common kind of arguments, as it were, whenever it relates to kind of like the LEED certification, a lot of these additional costs that would be incurred up front in the development process for developing these energy efficient buildings, is who's actually paying the utility bill? Okay, well, if the developer is paying the utility bill, you can kind of see this whole idea of, well, let's make it really energy efficient because I'm the one that's actually paying the bill. Therefore, whatever rent that I charge, I'm going to get to keep potentially more income for myself, okay, under kind of a gross lease sort of model. But most, you know, properties may very well be net leases where the individual tenants are going to be paying their proportion share based usually upon the square footage that they occupy for the space. And so therefore, if the costs are actually being pushed directly to the tenants, then, you know, how easy is it for us to make an argument to say, do we, you know, as from a developer's perspective that is, how easy is it for us to make the argument that we really want to put in all of this, you know, energy saving technology when we're not the ones actually paying the utility bill? In other words, kind of what we're saying is the market smart enough to kind of figure that out on their own? You sort of follow what I'm saying? And before I let you guys talk, couple of other things, and then we're going to open it up for you guys to kind of jump in. Like for example, if you're going out and you're leasing an apartment, okay, now this is just you, by yourself, how much attention do you personally put into the whole idea of, is this apartment or is this house energy efficient? Chances are most of you don't. And I'm not even saying that I do, and that I think that most, you know, most individuals probably don't, until what happens? They get a really ridiculously high energy bill, and then all of a sudden all the, you know, lights go on in the sense of wow, what a mistake did I make by moving into this house or this apartment or whatever, because the utility costs are through the roof. And to a certain extent, I would argue that a lot of especially smaller tenants make that same mistake. That they don't really do a good job probably of investigating what their utility costs are and you know, really taking that into consideration. Whereas major corporate tenants, the ones that you wouldn't even, you know, sort of consider as being quote unquote green or, you know, having that sort of mantra, like Walmart, pays an incredible amount of attention to their energy consumption, you know, for the properties they occupy. And Now, granted, they own a good number of those facilities, so therefore there's even, there's more of a direct incentive to do what? If you're gonna own the facility, then definitely you wanna make it as energy efficient. So there's, one aspect of what kind of tenant may be actually going after that. But then you still have, as I said, other corporate users of space that are gonna say, we want, a LEED certified space, and we're willing to pay maybe a little bit extra for that, simply because we realize that's probably going to translate into that lower overall operating cost for us in terms of lower utility bills. So, all of that having been said, anybody have, I guess, any other thoughts as it relates to kind of those sorts of issues on the LEED certified or energy efficient sort of properties?
I just wanted to say that I've seen lately that when you're talking about from the developer's perspective, like a Class B office, a lot of people are going for the LEED certification for existing buildings to achieve a Class A. So when you're working your numbers, you can achieve a higher, income.
No, I think that's an excellent point to make. That, okay, so the point being is, if you have effectively maybe a B plus sort of property, could you convert it into a Class A by making it LEED certified? I think that's an excellent point that you probably could. Okay, other thoughts? Okay, Frederick?
Yeah, is there any tax benefits?
There can be. I mean, in certain markets, there may be by the utility company. Not so sure about Florida, but I know in Texas there were, certainly tax considerations from the local utility companies for using either green energy or having a more energy efficient building based on like a Energy Star rating or whatever it might be. So yeah, there could be some potential benefits there. Absolutely. So what about, okay, then from the standpoint, you actually bring up on the whole idea of maybe tax considerations. So what about like on a valuation perspective for property tax purposes? To what extent would LEED certification ever come into play? Because you would think, once again, if the idea is that the value of the property, even for property tax purposes, is still going to be based off of the property's net operating income, well, the net operating income is going to be higher for an energy efficient building, therefore it should have a higher overall value. So there you even get into an issue that's kind of bizarre, to what extent that you may be penalized to a certain extent that the property is going to get a higher overall valuation from a property tax perspective, or even from a market perspective, and then would that, once again, kind of from the developer's perspective, would that be problematic? Any thoughts on that? Just no thoughts at all.
I mean, are there some cities that that
Yes.
does that?
Absolutely, and but then others, like you'd think like the more sophisticated cities like Seattle, Portland, Denver, some of those, New York, would probably tend to pay attention to those sorts of things. Whereas, once again, kind of the more regional, or not regional, but certainly less concerned about kind of sustainability and the energy consumption, that sort of thing, might not be. And there's also kind of another interesting aspect of this whole business of sustainability is, if you look across the entire country, tend to argue, well, cities I mentioned, like Portland, Seattle, Denver, San Francisco, a handful that, clearly have gone down the road of kind of energy efficiency and sustainability. How much of that is driven by necessity versus how much of it is driven by ideology? Okay, you understand what I'm asking, in terms of the difference? Necessity would mean you've got a shortage of resources, therefore we're going to be sustainable because we have to be. But being sustainable from an ideological perspective is more kind of that abstract notion of simply saying we're going to be sustainable because it's the right thing to do for the world, for the planet, for everybody involved kind of thing.
For example, exactly to the point, Miami, they developed something called Miami 21. Miami 21 is a submarket within the Miami area, and Miami 21 is geared towards sustainability. If you're building anything above 5,000 square foot, or refurbishing or doing anything, you have to go sustainable. You have to go green.
You have to LEED certified.
You have to LEED certified. And that's Miami 21. And it's not because of necessity, it's more ideological.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there are no benefits at all, just the opposite. I mean, you have to sign a bond and they give you all this. But in cities like New York, if you build on a green roof, over 35% of your roof is green built, you get a tax write-off from your property taxes of between 30 and 40% for the next 3 years. So you're getting some real, money back on whatever effort you do make. But here, I see that as an investment also when you're building. If you add up the life of the building in your numbers, supposedly you have an added life to the building when you build a LEED certified building. So that comes back to you when you're in the long term as a benefit as a developer.
Yep, no, I would agree. Also this whole thing of the regulatory aspect of the sustainability thing, and one of the things that you mentioned is, how does the city approach it? Do they do the kind of the carrot or the stick approach? And what I mean by that is, do they offer incentives or do they offer penalties for non-compliance?
Right.
It's two very different sort of mindsets that, from the developer's perspective, how that may even be perceived. Because most of us tend to respond better to what? Incentives. Most of us don't like, basically, being saying, hey, do this, do this, do this, and if you don't, we're going to throw you in jail, or we're going to assess this penalty, or we're going to, do that sort of thing, versus, the model of, okay, if you do this, we're going to reward you with a tax break, or we're going to reward you with, some other, so what do you think about that? I mean, philosophically, any perspective, Dustin?
I think the government plays an important role to get the ball moving. So in other words, LEED was never really picked up momentum until the government said, okay, we're going to make all of our buildings LEED and lead by example. And then in certain markets like San Francisco, it's almost like you have to do it because now it's market driven. So, here in Miami, it's not market driven yet. So it's important for the government to play a role to try to, make all those buildings over 5,000 square foot LEED, but at some point, it will turn into, a market driven where people are looking for that type of building. So I think that's where the government plays an important role to get it, but not to continue to do it, because then,
Right.
With incentives, get it moving with incentives, and then.
Okay, so let's just throw out a hypothetical then on the office market. So let's say that within, an office market, we've got 100 buildings, okay? And let's say that the top 25% perform at, this super energy efficient kind of, LEED certified, whatever we want to classify them. So this top 25% is outstanding. The bottom 25% is abysmal in terms of the level of energy performance that, just horrible, energy consumption. And the middle 50% is, it's okay. I mean, nothing, really to get excited about, but yet just not terrible. So do you employ an incentive and disincentive sort of model of saying, okay, we're going to reward the top 25% with all of these sort of incentives, but then on the bottom end, for those folks that are just egregious kind of situations with, really older buildings that are maybe deteriorated and they haven't really done anything to maintain them, do we assess massive fines on these people and then effectively reward these people with the money generated by the fines from these? What do you think?
the incentives would work for the bottom 25% too.
Could,
Incentivize
but you gotta,
them to
but sometimes you
upgrade that money,
could,
yeah.
but sometimes you have to pay for the incentives you're offering.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my point. You know, where does the money come from?
Well, it's gonna come from increased tax revenue for higher rents for more efficient buildings.
Yeah, I think if you penalize the Class C grade enough, you're gonna penalize them out of existence.
Okay, and some cities would argue that that may not be a bad thing to do. Okay, I'm not trying to advocate one or the other. I'm just simply saying, okay, what do you think? I mean, do you think that, because every city comes up with their own strategy for this sort of thing, you know, of how do we approach the idea of moving us forward. I mean, some cities, you know, like Miami, but like in Vancouver, Canada, all new office buildings must be a LEED Gold or higher. Must be, okay? Well, that's a pretty big step, you know, of saying all new, you know, buildings must meet that sort of standard. And, you know, to what extent, you know, that has, you know, an impact on the market. I mean, obviously you're placing an additional cost burden on the new properties being built, and at the same time, you know, are you, to a certain extent, you know, even indirectly, are you penalizing the folks down at the bottom?
I think the challenge sometimes, like with the economics, is really the certification itself, and just sort of like the, you know, that whole being able to navigate through getting your building certified, because, you know, it might play out well if you're just, okay, putting money into the building itself, and you'll be able to sort of quantify that return a little better, rather than, you know, the trouble you go through to certify, and then especially depending on where you are, and, you know.
Yeah, why would we even care about the certification? You know, if all we're really trying to accomplish is the energy efficiency aspect. And, you know, how do you measure energy efficiency? Well, you know, a simple way, well, let me ask you, for an office building, you know, just how would you go about trying to measure and compare within a market what the energy efficiency is for a set of office buildings? Assuming that you had access to information, what kind of information would you be collecting?
The utility bills.
The utility bills, pure and simple. And then looking at what the utility bills are per square foot of the amount of the space it's occupied, okay? You know, so whether that's water consumption, whether that's obviously electrical consumption, you know, whatever, you know, even trash output, you know, that sort of thing. You know, so yes, that's where you would want to start, and be able to kind of use that information to ultimately be able to come up with some sort of a ranking system, or you know, effectively being able to identify those properties that fit a certain profile. Well, one of the government agencies that you know has done this has published it. If you actually Google Energy Star, Google Energy Star. You have a computer in front of you, most of you. Energy Star is a rating system for properties, and it's kind of a voluntary sort of thing, but ultimately it's kind of gotten the ball rolling for a lot of the players predominantly within the office market, because the idea is a potential tenant could go to this and then effectively say which building has the best overall rating as it relates to energy consumption as a starting point. Okay?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Just as a side story, the other day, I was discussing in my house a development that we're doing in my office, and a development that we're doing as a family. And one of my two kids approach and sit down, and they were, you know, just brainstorming with us. And one of them said, "Mom, I understand that within this master plan that you have to go sustainable." And I was arguing to them that going way too green, you know, LEED certified, platinum, etc., was too costly. And one of them told me, "Do you understand that in 30 years, 20 years, we are the ones that are gonna come to be your tenants and to be the prospect buyers. We are the millenniums, and we care about the global warming. And for us, it's extremely important that sustainability and green and LEED certified is followed. And I was looking at them, I was like, okay. So in the small building that we as a family are doing, is that you cannot go anything below at least gold. Again, Mom, you have to think ahead of you. If you're a new developer, this is my kids. If you're a new developer, think about your future tenants. Don't think like your past tenants. What was your traditional tenants were looking at. Think about this new generation and the 30s and the 40s that are really conscious about
Sure.
the global warming and all the effects and
Right.
sustainability, et cetera. Those are your tenants.
Our company actually takes great pride in efficiency and things like that. We actually are building the first solar powered city in the world. It's probably just a little bit bigger than Manhattan, 20,000 homes, 6 million square feet of retail, and we are powering the entire city by a solar panel, 400-acre solar panel. And that's us looking into the future and looking into sustainable energy. We have cars that drive themselves, and we're just kind of making it the new form, the new city.
Sure.
So that in the future, this is kind of what people will be basing their development ideas on.
No, and that's exactly what I guess I'm trying to get at is to what extent this is an evolving kind of paradigm shift of what what, as you said, what we've been accustomed to in the past. We kind of, to a certain extent, have to set aside some of that sort of stuff and begin to kind of look at things a little bit differently. And the big one that you were able to sell the past generation on, to a certain extent, was just the energy efficiency aspect. Because that's a very quantifiable sort of thing, okay? And people can, make a very informed judgment, as to the actual cost. And there's no question that, we are beginning to evolve beyond that to where, we are trying to take into consideration some of those other intangible benefits that, potentially we haven't really considered as much in the past moving forward, so.
Even currently, companies like CBRE,
Yep.
when there's certain big 500 companies, when they're renting, and I've talked to some of the people that work there, and they told me, we have two separate spaces, same location, very close locations, and if one is LEED certified, specific tenants will go for the LEED
Absolutely.
certified because of the write-offs and also because of the prestige perception or the part of their corporate responsibility.
Yep.
Yes, you're able to charge more as a developer or as a, and you have to pay more if you want to LEED certify. But how does it come back to you when if you're a middle, and that was one of the questions that you were asking, why do it? Because if you're a small company or a medium company and you want to be in the right location and so
It's sometimes difficult, as a small to medium-sized developer to achieve the economies of scale and ultimately the benefit of kind of going full force.
for the right.
Right.
Yeah. It's
I think it's important if you're doing a type of development to stay on top of the trends because, look at a car 10 years ago that was energy efficient. Today it's a clunker. So, this is such a new novice, idea in terms of development. It's not, something that's been handed down. I just think there's so many changes, so much evolving with this energy efficiency. You really need to look at, does it make sense to do this project now, or there's a new technology coming out next year? When you teach this past 3 years from today, it's gonna be a total.
No, whenever we first started introducing, I'll be the first to say, the very first time that we started to use the term sustainability that I can remember in terms of incorporating into a classroom discussion was 1999. And since then, it has, I mean, and then it was just a very modest kind of, sort of discussion. Now, 15 years later, very, very different, kind of thing. That, first of all, back then, I can remember, you sort of throw out some of this whole, business of this, quote unquote, sustainability is kind of the broad topic, and, most everybody's eyes would just roll to the back of their head and say, yeah, whatever, kind of attitude toward it, and it was, and the biggest argument, which no one really even put up, was what I was trying to say, of why would we as a developer pay for any of this? Was the biggest argument that you would get, and you still get that argument today, but not as much, that, because, back then the developer would say, I'm not the one paying the utility bills. Why do I want to spend more of my money up front to effectively keep their utility bills down, because I'm not going to get rewarded for that? And to a certain extent, at the time, they were right. Because the market had not evolved to the point of where people are beginning to pay more attention to that sort of information. And, Dustin, whenever you made your comment, I think it was, about local governments and, federal government and state governments, all beginning to sort of mandate it for their own projects, that was a big step, because that began to sort of move the market, potentially in the right direction, that you could begin, because what would happen in a lot of cases, and I know I've seen that the cities would actually even publish the information about how much they were saving per square foot, and saying, our energy consumption has gone down by this amount, and ultimately, here is what our energy cost per square foot is, and so forth. Now, were there missteps along the way? Absolutely. I mean, one of the most kind of, okay, what would you say? Okay, let me throw it back on you. What one item would you say that in this whole discussion of sort of sustainability, energy consumption, that sort of thing, that was potentially incorporated into a lot of office properties that was not exactly what you would call a home run? Anybody? What?
Windows?
No. Nope. Not getting too disgusting. Waterless urinals.
Non-flushing.
Yeah, because, not getting, you understand, not exactly a pleasant sort of thing, that they thought, okay, well, this was a way to do what? Save water. Okay, and just didn't work, or didn't work well, and so that was, one, what I would call a little failure of sorts. But most of the things tended to work pretty well. The technology worked, and ultimately things have progressed. But yet you also, during that same time period, you had a lot of buildings doing things that were more window dressing as well. I mean, I can remember a number of buildings that would put solar panels on their roof. They would put a wind turbine on their roof, and these were like multi-story buildings. And there was no way that those handful of solar panels and wind turbine would power much of anything other than just a couple of minor things within the property, but yet it was their way of sort of saying, look at us, we are, drinking the green juice and doing the things that are ultimately sustainable. And the reality of it is that it was just all for show, of being able to show a prospective tenant or whoever, look at what we're sort of doing, versus the whole thing of really, making a conscious effort to make a substantive difference to, what they're actually achieving. And then that whole certification process of LEED, and then, there are others, LEED is probably the most predominant, is, the big argument, is certification necessary if we just simply do the things that certification requires without going through the process? But because in that certification process, like all others, you're basically looking at like points that you can achieve to receive that certification, and with all sort of point-based system, what do? You game the system. You look for what are the cheapest points to achieve so that you can get the most number of points at the lowest possible cost to ultimately get the certification. Okay? I mean, would you agree with that? As opposed to, what are the ones that may actually be the most transformative, that will do the most good overall, but yet don't yield as many points, therefore, we're not gonna inherently do that. And that was certainly, and I'm not saying that's, I mean, it's probably still happening, but certainly, over this past 15 years, that, was one of the kind of stops along the way, was this whole business of how do we game the system. And then so REE, I think, suffered a little bit as a result of some of that, because you had people saying, well, if I add bicycle racks and I add a shower for commuters that are biking to work and a couple of other things, I get so many points added to my score, that, and those are roughly cheap things for me to do, so therefore, that's what I'm gonna do.
Well, another thing that was triggered by all this federal regulation on the LEED, and was a good thing for the market, was that there's more competition, because now you can go out and check on 20 different kind of toilets.
Right.
Before 5-10 years ago, you have two choices, and they were very expensive. So costs as a developer have gone a little bit down.
Right.
The cost for certification is still there. It's painful and it's costly, but your overall cost as a developer has been pretty much, even sometimes cheaper than baseline.
Sure. Okay. All right. Other questions, comments, observations? Yep.
Well, I would imagine it would be a lot more expensive to LEED certify a 5,000 square foot building than a
Yes.
200,000
So yes. So once again, that gets back to that whole economies of scale thing. That the smaller properties, from a budget perspective, it just doesn't usually make sense. Because once again, I haven't kept up in real recent history with the cost of certification, but certainly what I seem to recall the cheapest level of certification, just the certification process, not actually
Right.
spending the money on the features, would have been, it's a documentation aspect of it, that you've got to literally go out, take pictures of the things you've done, submit the paperwork, somebody has to keep track of all of that, and that certification process for, even the most, the smallest of all properties may have been 10 grand. But then, obviously as you escalate into, much more expensive properties or larger properties, then just the cost of once again, the paperwork aspect, would potentially, escalate as well as the cost of actually doing the items to achieve the certification.
And for Miami 21 or some of those other ones, do you have to go LEED, or can you be Energy Star? Or?
You have to go LEED, and it's very painful too. It's you have to go LEED, and you have to put a bond, and it's
So you can't do like Energy Star or?
Now, there are other
Global,
certifications
the other one,
like
Global
Green
Green,
Globe. It's
right?
another one that they're using. It's accepted by the federal government since last year. It's perceived as cheaper. It's not at the end. They're about the same. It's easier at the beginning, the Green Globe one, and then LEED. And at the end, if for most everything, most rebate that you can get, LEED is the one that is easily recognized, and Green Globe is still there. But
Miami 21 is LEED.
it's LEED.
Okay, right.
I don't know, one thing to consider with the cost of LEED certification is if you take a long view on a building and think you're going to hold on to it for 20 years, the cost of energy is just going to go up in the future. And so your LEED Platinum building that might be really tough to make financial sense now, if your energy bill doubles in 10 years, might actually start to make a lot of sense. You'll be able to recoup some of that value.
That's if you're in winter occupied.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, if you're just building something to sell it, then maybe it wouldn't, I don't know.
Yeah,
Unless you can claim more value for that.
Well, and that's the whole thing. I mean, we're trying to really say that it's been difficult now post occupancy of a lot of these properties that were certified to be whatever level of certification that they achieved, to go back now, let's say 5 years, 10 years later, and say, how have they really performed? you know, we spent all this money putting all this stuff in, but the post-occupancy aspects, you know, would probably, you know, I'm sure that, you know, some of the things that maybe performed as well as what would have been anticipated, maybe other things would have outperformed what you'd have anticipated, but then you probably still have, you know, certain instances of where things did not perform at all in the way that, you know, and I think I may have, you know, told you the story about one of the properties that we visited in Australia, that they had gone to the extent of zoning different parts of each office floor for air conditioning and lighting and a whole number of features that, like, depending on where the sun was on the outside of the building, the shades would automatically raise and lower to minimize the heat coming into the building. But they also had it set up to where no occupant of the space was to have their desk any closer than effectively like 8 feet from a window. And the whole idea was to have the perimeter walk space, you know, kind of around, and so that effectively no one would be sitting this close, so that there would, because the amount of additional air conditioning that would be necessary to accommodate the person sitting right here, you know, to keep them cool, is vastly different than to keep them cool over here.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, what ended up happening post-occupancy, of course, is individual tenants, what do? They totally ignored all of that, put everybody up against the window, so the energy cost, you know, shot up through the roof. The other thing that happened post-occupancy was the tenants were not working in any way, shape, form, or fashion normal, quote-unquote, business hours. They were, you know, some of them were coming in, you know, 8, 9 o'clock at night, working until 4 o'clock in the morning, and then somebody else coming in, you know, it was almost like a 24-hour-a-day kind of cycle. And the way they had modeled all of the energy was effectively, you know, on more of a typical kind of 7 o'clock to like 6 o'clock sort of model, with, you know, very few people, and, you know, coming in after. But the problem was, even with what they had tried to accomplish with the zoning of the lighting and the air conditioning, you have somebody using the space 24 hours a day, that's going to drive up your occupancy cost. So, you know, but things like that is, you know, it's just interesting that, you know, with the best laid plans or the best intentions, that sometimes things don't always sort of turn out the way that you would expect. One of the other more bizarre ones that I may have shared with some of the students who've been on the program for a while was one of the other properties we visited in Australia, and it was a resort property. Did I tell you about this? The one about where it was a 5-star resort in Corin Cove, and had about 500 units, all, you know, very tropical, on its own little island. They produced all their own electricity, basically dealt with all their garbage on site, everything, you know, very super sustainable sort of property whenever they first opened, and that was kind of their whole mantra, was we're going to be this 5-star eco resort. Well, one of the things that they had put into place, which was fascinating when we visited this property, was a camera system, not a camera system, a video system that on your TV in your room would tell you how much energy you were using. Like, in terms of, you know, you turn on the light switch, instantly you see the little meter on the TV, you know, saying you're using, you know, X number of whatever kilowatts per hour of electricity. You know, you turn on the anything in the room, obviously, and you instantly see what your consumption is. You turn on the air conditioner, you see it go up. You use the water, flush the toilet, take a shower, whatever, you see on there how many gallons of water you have used and effectively, you know, that sort of thing. So they had this wonderful system they had put into place, this monitoring system. And the initial results were, it was working exceedingly well, saving them, you know, huge amounts in terms of their energy cost. And one of the things that they did initially, which was really funny, but it had unintended consequences, was I told this. Okay. All right. So they effectively they told all the residents, you know, the person that affected, or the room that used the least amount of you know, everything, will get like a free room. And so you had all these people literally not showering, not turning on their lights, not doing anything, you know, all ultimately to try to win this, you know, free room night. And, you know, it worked, but it was, you know, kind of a weird thing. You've got a bunch of smelly people wandering around this was a really nice resort. But what was disturbing was I went back to the same resort about 10 years later. And part of the whole idea was just, take a look at, how things had worked and that sort of thing. So I get to the room, turn on the TV to see, it's like, well, where's the monitoring stuff? So I couldn't find it, and so I went back to the front desk and said, oh, well, yeah, we stopped doing that a couple of years ago, because it was incompatible with our new system for movies on demand, and we made more money with the movies on demand than we were saving in the energy costs, so we just basically dropped it, sadly. But it's just interesting, once again, some of these things that put into place that you think are great ideas that don't always, long-term inherently work out. But yet, that concept is kind of an interesting one, from the standpoint of, are we more conscious of our energy consumption when it is being monitored? And then ultimately we can see in real time what we're actually expending. Imagine at your home or at your office, if, every time you did flip a switch or, flush a toilet or take a shower or whatever, you could see in real time, and to a certain extent now you can with certain devices to allow you to do that, and to what extent that would and maybe does modify behavior patterns.
I mean, like a friendly reminder, just beyond that, sometimes works, because like I took my kids on a cruise, and it was Royal Caribbean. And before before you step out the door of the cabin, it says save the waves, and so turn off the lights and whatnot. And my kids were like stickers for that thing. Every time they stepped out the door, Daddy, take off the lights.
Right.
But at home, I can't get them to take off the lights at all. I'm always telling them, go take off the lights. So I'm trying to tell them, save the waves, save the waves.
You're paying the bill?
I'm paying the bill.
So anyway, but those are things definitely kind of food for thought of things to consider. So let's do this, like a quick break, 5 minutes, come back. Those of you that I did not get a chance to pass out one of the development periodicals to, let me get you a copy of that. What we're going to do, a little exercise a little bit later, is talk about some kind of current events. Once again, 5 minute break, get out of here. Go walk in the hall and do something. You good?
Good, man.
Me encanta el mercado de la decisión.
If only you were gonna figure out what, next time.
I'm Sicilian.
You do a good nice job. You get a haircut?
No.
Ed, what have you done?
What's that?
Oh, there we go.
What do you got?
Dum-dums? Oh my God. I love that.
Yeah.
I just thought about it, Brutal. Brutal.
So, buddy, what's going on? You gonna go to that thing on Thursday?
Oh, yeah.
What time is it at? At night?
Okay.
Morning?
Is it?
Yeah.
Wait, what? Where we going?
No, the comic.
All right, well, as far as the
I don't
test
think
is
it's that
concerned, we need to
9
schedule a
o'clock.
time, I'll do sometime this next week to do the makeup
Gonna
test.
do present?
Okay?
No, we already did all that.
I was told about present.
I'm not gonna be
Okay, I mean, we're just figuring out a time that's gonna work for you this week to take the makeup test, and then just email me, let me know, and we'll confirm it.
Yeah.
We can just meet here and sometime during the week.
Okay.
3 to 5.
Oh, yeah.
You have Alex in on that email loop, right?
Yeah,
The Thursday?
yep.
Shift, CD, future value, plus minus.
And remind me to bring that up, because I need to get well, obviously you're not gonna be there, but I need to figure out who else is gonna be there, because I think they're gonna hand out the individual plaques and checks and all that sort of stuff.
Get one of those little cardboard
I
bags?
don't know.
Do we have a visit today, or a site visit?
Not today. On March the 7th, we've got 4 speakers that have been confirmed, and then March the 21st, then we have all site visits.
Can't take that many notes in one day.
What?
It's a lot of notes. 4 speakers in one day.
You all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't have a full-time job right now, she already put in her notice.
Sure.
Yeah, why? Do I look out there?
Full-time student still, but yeah, so we got.
Is that obvious?
Students working, yeah, fine, Judge.
Here's not your normal talking himself today.
To myself about certain topics. I'm not getting into it.
Actually, speaking of that, did you mind if I took the rest of this class on YouTube?
It's up to you.
It's been 3 years and 1 month.
I understand.
It's not working for that.
Totally up to you. I understand.
That's what I'm saying. We don't have somebody come in. Appreciate it.
Okay. Do what you gotta do.
Yeah, no doubt.
Probably not.
We have our midterm next week, don't we?
Yep.
So this month,
Yep.
Are you gonna go over any suggestions?
Focus on the topics I talk about. Focus on the calculations, the feasibility front door, back door, and energy efficiency sort of stuff. We're gonna do some more of that today.
So is some of it gonna be on the computer?
Yeah.
So I'm putting proposal. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the last
They got
exam I
clear
revised how you
budgeting it,
make
but which one
charts.
of course. So I gotta like convince them. I don't know if I did it, the other developers. Yeah. Proposal says. Put together.
Okay.
Alright, thanks a lot.
Yes, we gotta get this.
2011. That's nothing on my work laptop. Twice next time.
Yeah, the guy in my office is like that.
Yeah.
It's huge. Super old, like February 2011. You are? I'm showing you my
See if you
proposal.
can give me one too.
I'm trying. I'm trying to. I'll spend 3 days on it. Look at this, this is an hour to start.
Windows 98 on there?
Not, dude, this is an Intel Pentium processor, that's it. It's just Intel, what is it, the Intel Pentium, that's the Pentium.
One.
Yeah, one, original. Remember it was like, it's a Pentium 3. Oh my god, Pentium 3! It's so fast, bro. It was so good. They were like, yeah, giant. So I've got like what it does. Yeah. No problem. Oh yeah. Okay. In my thing, it's like, what is it? But my favorite line, my favorite line.
We did record why you needed it.
The industry in which you're working. Wait.
That's really cool.
I did read the photo. As the new year is coming and gone, so much old technology. That's why I love it. And then I got like, I got
That's my favorite part, is like the overview of the whole thing. Because it will become something. If it works, then you work to make it become something.
No, that's exactly what I love. It's like,
Clean and organized, commercial papers all over the place.
coming up with a concept.
The best.
It's the creative side and the financial side. It's like a little bit of everything.
The president,
I would love to get that up.
the president of Talus, which is like my boss. Okay. I have like 3 bosses. No, you will get the final, just you will have me. Okay. About 4 like years. They got me in work. So I have my card and I show it to the work. But.
They've been getting a lot of traction to the last few years.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so by now, just real briefly, I know a couple of you managed to pull up the energy efficiency on Energy Star, that sort of thing. Any things that you found?
There's a calculator to sort of calculate your, they call it a C, cash flow opportunity calculator. That's kind of cool. I guess you can type it.
And then they also have a database in there of properties that effectively, so that you can kind of look for properties within a particular market and kind of what their rating is and be able to potentially kind of use that information. Okay, so just a good little resource to potentially take advantage of. All right, moving on, let's kind of talk a little bit about the market analysis aspect of office development. Because a good portion of what we need to do in terms of understanding the market from a developer's perspective is doing a good job up front on the market analysis piece. So at the most fundamental sort of basic level, we've sort of said this before in other courses, what are probably the 2 most important pieces of information to collect as it relates to the market analysis?
Vacancy,
And rental rates.
occupancy.
Vacancies and rental rates. Okay? By individual submarkets, by class of property. You know, so ensuring that you're obviously getting the right market segment to get the right information on both of those pieces of information. What other things would you want to know about office properties? I mean, obviously we mentioned all those things that delineate a Class A versus a Class B versus a Class C sort of thing. Are there other pieces of information, though, that you might want to collect about office properties in addition to those that we might want to include on our list in market analysis?
New construction or
Okay.
absorption.
Okay, so new construction and absorption, we're going to get that information predominant, or at least certainly on the new construction side, from building permits. Okay, and looking at, you know, what building permits have been filed, what property, what, you know, where the properties are that are under construction, when they're going to be completed, how quickly are they leasing up is kind of only absorption side of things. You know, do we have a lot of vacancy with the new properties that are being built? Or are they just simply pulling tenants from existing properties into those properties? So all of that's going to be extremely important to us. Okay, what other kinds of information would we want to think about as it relates to market analysis? Yep.
You want to know who the major employers are, if they're expanding or contracting, or
Absolutely.
there's a certain segment that they're trying to attract, like a technology hub. And
Okay, so major tenants in the market and what they're doing. And sort of going along with that, in terms of not only just who the major tenants are, but how much space per employee are they allocating, okay? And how that's evolving. So the space, office space per employee. Because, and this is not a new concept. I mean, this whole idea of, you know, kind of at the beginning of this, you know, it was sort of called office hoteling. You know, and the idea was that you may be an accounting firm, you may be a law firm, you may be some other sort of service-based firm, and you know, you might have 100 employees, but yet at any given time, maybe only 20 or 30 of those employees would actually need office space. The others would be out in the field or working from home or whatever it might be. So why do you need to keep an individual office for every single one of these folks? Because that's adding to your operating cost as a business. So what you would do, especially like I said with the accounting firms, is they would be like, well, whenever you showed up in the morning, you would not necessarily go to the same office that you would ordinarily use. It would be kind of like almost like a first come, first serve kind of situation that, you know, whoever got there first got, you know, whatever offices as they became available, and you logged into a workstation. And in some cases, they even got a little bit more kind of interesting about it, that maybe they gave you a locker of sorts, you know, where you would have maybe your personal effects that you would then migrate to, you know, the actual office or workspace you're going to be using that day. And if you were actually going to be meeting with a client, then they'd put you in a nice corner office and, you know, that sort of thing with a nicer furniture in view and whatever. And so, you know, that whole concept, you know, has continued to kind of evolve, and also, you know, just sort of, you know, saying, well, do we also need to have the office space quite as segmented as maybe what it has been in terms of actually putting up full partition walls between each office? You know, do we instead go to a more cubicle kind of environment, or do we go, you know, even a step beyond that and just simply say, we're just going to put a bunch of desks in the room, you know, no dividers, no privacy, no whatever, you're just gonna, you know, and that's the kind of environment that you're potentially gonna work in, and hopefully that works. If there's a need for privacy, well then maybe you go into almost like a phone booth kind of cone of silence or whatever. And, you know, so to what extent that you know, you try to think, well, how is this space being used? How are you sort of evolving, you know, to meet whatever the need is for those current office tenants? So what do you, I mean, that last point, this whole business of kind of how much space per employee, I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, do you think that
Sorry. PwC moved from the Four Seasons to downtown Miami, and they're doing the exact thing. They downsized, and they're doing like hoteling for a lot of their like audit and tax younger people. I mean, the big honchos, obviously, they still have their own office, but they've done that. And this has been going on all around the world for like the last 5-10 years. I mean, even if...
Well, actually, believe it or not, the first I had ever heard of it was in 1995.
Yeah.
And so, you know, basically 20 years, because the first time I heard about it was with one of the accounting firms when I was teaching at UT Austin, and the guy had just gotten a job at an accounting firm, and he was telling me, you know, this is precisely how that his was, and then subsequent to that, then I've heard more and more and more and more discussion on it, but yeah.
So some of them are working and some of them are switching back. Like it's sort of because like advertising companies and other, you know, types of companies are trying to do it, and they're starting to do more research on what kinds of companies are able to do it, and efficiently it makes them more money and it works, and other times it doesn't because the employees don't like it. I mean, it's not great for employees.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, some folks, you know, they miss the whole water cooler conversations, they miss the, you know, that level of interaction with their, you know, coworkers.
Yeah.
And you know, those sorts of things. So, you know, and in that sense, absolutely.
Yeah, I heard about that around that time. My husband used to work for Cisco, and his actual office was in Atlanta. At that time, it was Scientific Atlanta. And his actual office was in Atlanta, and he had like a telephone booth in Atlanta with a screen. If you want to talk to him, it was a video conference, and his office was in our house. And you want to talk to him, and you needed something from him, he was always there, but in the office in Miami, and the office was in Atlanta.
Virtual, yeah.
And they started cutting costs on traveling.
Right.
By doing the telesystem around the world. And by the beginning of the 2000s, they changed the entire concept of all their offices in Cisco to the first come, first served basis. And when you walk into any of their offices, no one owns an office. It's a round table, because they don't believe in square tables. they believe that square tables or rectangular tables are intimidating and not productive. So it's circular tables, and you have lockers where you leave your stuff, and first come, first served basis, office space.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Okay, good. Dustin?
How does that work for existing buildings in the space? You know, if you wanted to take 400 square foot per person down to 211, I mean, that building was permitted, certificate of use for,
You were right on target, because that's one of the biggest issues, is that, you know, these buildings were built with a certain occupancy in mind, and part of that occupancy was, and part of why it would matter, once again, we get back to air conditioning systems. That,
Right.
you know, we all need a certain amount of air, you know, to obviously, and the comfort level.
right?
You start adding more and more bodies in a, you know, smaller and smaller confined space, along with the heat thrown off by the computers and you know, that sort of thing. And so the air conditioning systems that maybe were put into place in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s may not be sufficient enough to actually, you know, handle that increased load by the increased density. So
You
that's,
also have like more, you know, the structural side of
yeah,
the
the weight,
elevators, you
yeah.
know, it's not gonna be too many people going up and down the elevators and not wide enough fire exit.
Yep. No, all of those issues, and, you know, so the problems with the retrofit, that automatically, because of some of those functionality issues, those right there are the very reasons why it would maybe go from a Class A to a Class B to a Class C, you know, in a roughly short time horizon, and its inability to be able to, you know, maintain that level of comfort or safety or whatever it might be for the tenants. Okay.
It's interesting what you were saying about telecommuting, and my company is doing more work from home days. I think eventually just to have majority of its employees work from home. It'll be interesting, it seems like the downward trend for Class A office space, since we're getting more into a kind of an isolated work environment. You
Right.
work at home, you mentioned it the other week, where you can live at home and order your groceries and you never have to leave. Now that's becoming the same as the workplace.
Right. No, I would agree. Other thoughts on this issue? No one? Okay. So one of the other things that they mentioned as we were sort of talking about tenants and their use of space, they talked a little bit about phantom space, or I think their term was actually, what was it they called it? Shadow space.
One last.
Yep.
There's an interesting case. If you look in the internet, is the Bancolombia headquarters in Medellin. It was done by a firm here in the U.S. It's one of the most advanced green buildings in Latin America. But IA Interior Architects, they explain the project in their website, how the space parameters per person, per cubicle, double spaces, and why they did what you said at the beginning. The entire building, the entire floors are walkable around. So there's about 8 feet back from the windows. So, but they explain the whys on their website. And it's extremely interesting because the design concept, the parameters, why they did it, and how they calculated per person, and it's a pretty cool example of what you were describing.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that they mentioned, and I had talked about this a little bit, I think, even on the first day of class, this whole idea of kind of phantom space and shadow space with respect to kind of the market analysis of knowing how much space is actually available, okay, in a market that sometimes there can be a very significant amount of this kind of shadow or phantom space. And what we mean by this is space that is leased out but not occupied. Now, once again, you sort of saying, well, what do you mean by that? Well, it may be the case in the way that your text, kind of describes it, as the whole notion of you've got a tenant that thinks that maybe they need space to expand into, so they lease upfront more space than they actually need, and then ultimately that space just kind of just sits there. Now, they may actually not pay the full rental rate on that space, that the property owner allows them to maybe rent it at a discounted rate because they're not actually physically using it, but it's kind of like putting it on reserve to a certain extent. But to what extent that space is taken out of the building inventory of available space, and so therefore, whenever you're trying to calculate what is the overall occupancy rate within a market, there's a fair amount of that kind of phantom or shadow space that may exist that is not inherently easy to see, and it could all at some point come on the market and be a fairly significant disruption. Now, another sort of category that I would throw in there with that kind of shadow and phantom space is space that is currently not on the market because maybe the property is totally unoccupied, like as in an office building, it's totally unoccupied, and it maybe needs to be renovated, but maybe the renovation cost for whatever reason, or maybe either at the moment are too high, but maybe subsequently it does become very cost effective to renovate. Maybe interest rates have dropped, demand is raised to where overall rental rates are higher, so all of a sudden that building gets either sold or gets renovated, and so instantly you could have a very significant amount of space being put back onto the market that was taken out. Now, it seems all very obvious, but yet, sort of to Tyler's point of just, being aware of what not only the new construction is and the absorption is, but also this whole, thing of the renovated space or adapted space, and what extent that space is being placed back on the market and what impact that's going to have, okay? And you do remember the whole discussion we had about earlier about the shadow and the phantom space, that we said that certainly that at one point in the late 90s, part of that was driven by who? The high-tech firms, okay? That those sort of dot-com firms, that the property owners were saying, hey, we don't really believe inherently that you're going to be successful, so therefore we're going to require, you've got a lot of cash up front, so we'll have you prepay your rent for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, and then ultimately they went out of business, maybe a year or so later, and then the space just sat empty, but yet it was effectively already bought and paid for, okay, and could not be released without potentially giving up that revenue that they had already acquired. Okay? Questions, comments? Yep.
Can I get a layman term for absorption? I'm trying to...
Absorption is just how the space is ultimately being occupied over time. In other words, absorbed means that if you have an empty building, okay, and it goes from being 10% occupied to being 50% occupied to being 80% occupied, it's how quickly does that process happen, is the absorption, okay? That space is being absorbed by tenants and ultimately then being used. So,
Yeah.
okay, listen.
Well, no, just like examples of that, Office Depot, it may be relocating because, like, I don't know if it's in
Yeah.
but they're merging.
Right, Office Max, Office Depot, yeah.
They probably have like 700,000 square feet in Boca, but the lease won't be up for another 10 years.
Right.
So the space is either, and it was built to suit
Right.
for them. So the space is gonna have to be renovated, but it's also, it's just gonna sit vacant for a while, most likely. And American Express is doing the same thing. They have a lease in Plantation, and they're building their own place in Sawgrass. So there's gonna be like hundreds of thousands of square feet just sitting there, which may have to be
Absolutely.
turned into residential, or
Something,
there's talks of a lot of things happening there. But the leases don't expire for like 10 to 20 years on some of those.
Yeah, and that's very important and very significant for those markets, to what extent, more than likely those spaces, yeah, just may just sit there dark, for a good portion of that time, if not all of that time. unless, you know, some arrangements can be made to try to figure out either creative uses for them, but, you know, a lot of times the owners of the properties, or if they accept new tenants in the properties, well, then that kind of negates the revenue stream, so they may just, you know, once again, they're looking at it, this is purely fixed income security from their perspective.
I was gonna ask that, so what would be a remedy for that? Do they have a buyout clause? What happens if a company has to move like that?
That once again, it can be dictated by the lease agreement, and, you know, what happens in a lot of cases, you know, certainly with like grocery store tenants and, you know, these sort of big box tenants, is they, a lot of times will engage in these leases that are 20, 30 years in duration, you know, because they know they're gonna be there, theoretically, you know, for a very long period of time, and they don't wanna have to go through a bunch of renegotiations of leases, so they'll usually put in, you know, fairly standard typical language with regard to kind of what escalation clauses might be for the rents, you know, tying it maybe to some sort of an index or to market-based rents and having it maybe reevaluated every few years, whatever it might be. But setting that aside, part of the issue is, and the question that you're sort of asking is, well, what happens if that tenant moves out but doesn't, you know, inherently declare bankruptcy? They're still in business, but they're merging with, you know, another tenant, or simply vacating that market specifically because it's no longer profitable or as profitable maybe it has been, but yet they still have that lease in place. The problem that usually happens there is if I'm the property owner of that space, because many of them are just simply tenants, if I'm the property owner of that space, if I, even though they have vacated the space and they have, you know, still have that commitment of the next 15, 20, you know, years, if I try or I succeed in actually releasing that space to another tenant, I may completely forego all of that possible income to just keep it empty. It seems stupid, you know, but at the same time, there, you know, could very well be that case of where, as the property owner, I'm just forced to effectively keep the space dark. Now, I may choose to not do that, because by keeping it dark, there may be the whole perception of, well, now, you know, effectively we've got this blighted, you know, kind of negative market imagery or whatever, you know, out there about that space. Or I could actually have a tenant in line that is willing to pay more for the space per square foot than they were paying. So in that case, yeah, then, you know, potentially, you know, but yet you could also have the situation of where the prior tenant wants to keep paying the rent to keep potentially a competitor from moving in there. Okay, that you have, especially that was what I was getting around with the grocery store chains, is that some of them, you know, because they're set up for being a grocery store, you know, in terms of the layout and the electrical work and the, you know, all the things that are necessary for it to be a grocery store, that they may be, you know, once again, are vacating that particular store location, but yet they don't want, because they're maybe moving across town or, you know, whatever it might be, they don't want maybe that old location to fall in the hands of one of their competitors that could instantly move in there, take possession of it, and potentially compete directly with them.
Or they can even sublease it too, right?
They could. Yeah, but that's the whole thing, that they would stipulate that it would not be a grocery use. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, it just happens every day. It's every day. They'll move across the street and they'll just keep paying their checks. They'll include any other new grocer coming.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in on this one?
When Office Depot and Staples potentially merged, and when Office Depot and Office Max merged, they had to close locations. But
Right.
what they did with those spaces, some of them probably didn't go straight back onto the market.
Right.
So,
Because you've got a lot of potential closures out there of, I mean, you know, this is not anything new, but, you know, like one of the ones that's gotten a little bit of attention recently, Radio Shack. I mean, who shops at Radio Shack anymore? I mean, it was probably my favorite store as a kid in the 1970s and 80s, but have not been there, you know, for the most part since.
I know, man.
But yeah, you know, that's you know, once again, you know, another great example of you know, types of, I mean, you know, we all, you know, most of us have lived through the whole thing of the video store thing. You know, you had the video stores, super popular, boom, now they're gone. You know, many of the bookstores, boom, they're gone. You know, all of those kinds of sort of users of space. You know, Sears now, you know, closing a good number of their stores. Once again, who shops at Sears? I mean, you know, the last time that I went into a Sears, you know, a few years ago, just to literally just walk into it, there were no customers. It was almost like a ghost town of you know, and so it was easy to see how they potentially, you know, would be going out of business. But the interesting thing about Sears is they still owned a number of their stores, so their real estate is extremely valuable, okay? And that's an interesting play in and of itself, where the company may be worth more dead than alive, simply because of the real estate that they own. And so, you know, that's kind of an interesting play in and of itself, that, you know, you start selling off those real estate assets, but yet, you know, you're trying to keep the company kind of in business while you're doing that. Not necessarily inherently the best strategy. You probably, you know, ought to just kind of face up to the reality that, okay, the store as a concept just doesn't work anymore for whatever reasons, that it's just out of step with where we are as a society, and then say, well, let's get rid of this real estate and cash out, pay off our shareholders, and move on down the road.
I went to a conference like many years ago, and one of the speakers was the chairman of McDonald's, and he said to the audience, what do you think that McDonald's is in the business for? And everybody say hamburgers. Say, you guys are completely wrong. We are in the real estate business. We own the best locations in the world, the best corners, the best locations, and that's in the business that we are. We are not in the hamburger business. If something goes wrong with McDonald's, we have the real estate, and that's even more valuable than selling hamburgers.
Right. Nope, nobody agree. Dustin?
We do a lot of contracting work for JCPenney, and they own a lot of their buildings. And it's interesting that I never really thought about it, but they own the building, and there's a mall wrapped around it, and it's they don't own the mall. So it's just I never really thought that you could do that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
separate it out.
because most malls are sort of condominiumized, or at least for the major anchor tenants. You know, the inline tenants, they usually don't own their space. That's going to be, you know, more obviously kind of the corporate owner, but a lot of the individual, pad sites for the major tenants. A lot of them are going to own it.
Question, if they are attached, Dustin was saying, do they fall under like a core agreement where they can't separate from the actual center, even if they were to sell it? Or they can't separate from the mall? How does that?
Well, I would think it would just be dictated by what the original terms of the agreement are. That, I mean, I would think that it would be seen as
Attached or
right.
maybe.
And they have to like pay for like it would just be
Right.
HOA dues sort of.
Right.
Oh, they still pay that.
In the mall.
Well, I mean, I would think they would be required to still pay them as long as the mall is open, just simply because it was probably part of their prior agreement. Even though they've shut down business themselves, they probably are still going to be responsible for some of those common area charges, unless, once again, they're not by virtue of the agreement.
Because I read
Obviously, they're
that
bankrupt. Well, that's a whole other story.
with Aventura Mall that they were going to do that with that Sears. They're partnering up with the Aventura Mall to build like a mixed-use development where the Sears location is. Turnberry is, yeah.
So one of the things that Alyssa mentioned that I think is an extremely important sort of concept here, and this whole notion of build to suit. And this could apply to office space, could apply to industrial, could apply to retail, residential. I mean, the whole idea, and you probably have heard this concept before, but the whole idea behind build to suit is you are building for a very specific tenant, okay? In terms of how the property is designed, how it's effectively, you know, down to in some cases, the details of what kind of lighting, all the interior finishes, you know, those sorts of things, as opposed to kind of the other model, if you will, other than build to suit, is what we would call spec space.
Right.
Okay, that effectively you're sort of kind of building the generic box, and then whatever tenants come along, then you do some, you know, minor differences with interior finishes to kind of finish it out for them, and then ultimately call it a day. But with the build to suit, you know, sometimes it makes it really difficult, depending on how unique their design was,